Have you ever felt like love wasn't in the cards for you? Like maybe you were destined to be alone? Today's story might just change your perspective. If this touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us all that love finds us in the most unexpected ways. The rain pounded against the windows of Café Lumière, matching the rhythm of Eliza Morgan's tapping fingers on her empty coffee mug. 34 years old, with a career she loved but a heart that felt increasingly hollow, she stared at the dating app on her phone with growing frustration. Another conversation had fizzled out after 3 messages. Another potential connection evaporated into the digital ether. "No one wants to date me," she muttered, loud enough that Maya, her best friend since college, looked up from her latte with concern etched across her face. "That's not true, Liz," Maya said, reaching across the table to squeeze Eliza's hand. "You're just meeting the wrong people." Eliza sighed, tucking a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. "I've been meeting the wrong people for 12 years now. At some point, you have to wonder if maybe the problem isn't them, it's me." What Eliza couldn't know was that across the cafe, a pair of warm brown eyes had glanced up at the sound of her voice. Daniel Carter, 38, single father to 7-year-old Sophie, had been trying to work on his laptop while his daughter was at her weekly art class next door. But something about the raw honesty in Eliza's voice had caught his attention. Daniel knew that feeling all too well. After his wife Lisa's death from cancer 3 years ago, he'd been adrift in a world that suddenly seemed designed for couples. Every school event, every neighborhood barbecue, every holiday gathering, all of them served as painful reminders that he was now navigating life alone, with a child who still sometimes cried for her mother at night. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but in that moment, he felt a strange connection to this woman he'd never met. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for them both. Eliza worked as a children's book editor at a small but respected publishing house. She loved her job, loved the way stories could transport children to magical worlds, loved helping authors refine their vision, loved the knowledge that somewhere, a child might be falling asleep to words she had helped shape. But lately, the stories of happily ever afters had begun to feel like cruel reminders of what she didn't have. "I think I'm going to take a break from dating," she told Maya as they prepared to leave the cafe. "Focus on myself for a while." Maya nodded, though her eyes betrayed her concern. "If that's what you need. Just don't close yourself off completely, okay?" As Eliza gathered her things, her phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor and sliding across the polished wood. Before she could react, a hand reached down to retrieve it. "I think you dropped this," said a voice, warm and slightly hesitant. Eliza looked up to thank the stranger and found herself looking into the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with dark hair peppered with gray at the temples, laugh lines etched around his eyes despite the fact that he wasn't smiling. "Thank you," she said, taking the phone. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, neither moved. "I'm Daniel," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Eliza," she replied, suddenly aware of Maya watching with undisguised interest. "I couldn't help overhearing earlier," Daniel said, his voice lowering slightly. "About dating. I just wanted to say. I get it. It's not easy out there." Under normal circumstances, Eliza might have been annoyed at a stranger commenting on her personal conversation. But there was something in his voice, not pity, but genuine understanding, that disarmed her. "No," she agreed. "It's not." A small commotion at the door drew their attention. A little girl with dark curls and Daniel's eyes burst into the cafe, waving a piece of paper. "Daddy! Look what I made," she called, rushing toward them. Daniel's face transformed with a smile that reached all the way to those kind eyes. "Sophie, indoor voice, remember," he said gently, but his pride was evident as he took the artwork, a watercolor painting of what appeared to be a family of giraffes. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," he said, then turned to Eliza. "My daughter, Sophie. She's the artist in the family." Sophie looked up at Eliza with curious eyes. Do you like giraffes? She asked without preamble. Eliza smiled, crouching down to Sophie's level. I love giraffes. Did you know they have the same number of neck vertebrae as humans? Just 7, but theirs are much longer. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? That's so cool. Daddy, did you know that? Daniel shook his head, looking at Eliza with new interest. I didn't. How do you know so much about giraffes? I'm a children's book editor, Eliza explained, standing up. You pick up all sorts of random facts. A book editor? Sophie exclaimed. That's the best job ever. Do you know Matilda? That's my favorite book in the whole world. Eliza laughed. I do know Matilda. That was one of my favorites growing up too. Maya, who had been watching this exchange with growing delight, cleared her throat. I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow. She gave Eliza a meaningful look. Call me later? After Maya left, an awkward silence fell. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other. We should probably get going too, he said finally. Sophie has homework. Daddy, Sophie said, tugging on his sleeve and speaking in what she clearly thought was a whisper but was actually quite audible, ask her for her number. Daniel's face flushed. Sophie. Eliza felt her own cheeks warm, but she found herself smiling. There was something refreshingly honest about children. It's okay, she said, surprising herself. I wouldn't mind. Daniel looked at her, hope and hesitation warring in his expression. Really? Eliza nodded, feeling something shift inside her, like a door she'd been pushing against suddenly opening. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant 2 weeks later. Daniel had arranged for Sophie to stay with his sister, though he admitted to Eliza that it was the first time he'd been on a date since Lisa died. I wasn't sure I'd ever want to date again, he confessed over pasta. After Lisa got sick, everything else just stopped mattering. And then after she was gone, it was all about making sure Sophie was okay. Making sure I was functional enough to be what she needed. Eliza listened, moved by his honesty. How is Sophie doing now? Daniel's expression softened. She's resilient. Kids are, I guess. She still has moments where she misses her mom terribly. Birthdays are hard. Mother's Day is, well, we usually go hiking that day, get out of the house. And you? Eliza asked gently. How are you doing? Daniel was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta around his fork without eating it. I'm getting there. For a long time, I felt guilty even thinking about being happy again. Like it would somehow dishonor Lisa's memory. And now? He looked up, meeting her eyes. Now I think she'd want me to live. To be happy. To let Sophie see that it's okay to love again. The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep in Eliza. She'd dated men who played games, who kept their feelings guarded, who treated relationships like transactions. Daniel's openness was like a breath of fresh air. What about you? He asked. You said at the café that no one wants to date you. I find that hard to believe. Eliza sighed, taking a sip of her wine. It's complicated. I've had relationships, but they never seem to last. My last serious boyfriend told me I was too intense. The one before that said I was too focused on my career. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just not cut out for relationships. Or maybe, Daniel suggested, you just haven't met someone who appreciates those things about you. Their eyes met across the table, and Eliza felt a flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. Their relationship developed slowly, cautiously. Daniel was careful about involving Sophie too quickly, and Eliza respected that. They had coffee dates while Sophie was at school, phone conversations that stretched late into the night after Sophie was asleep, and occasional dinners when Daniel's sister could babysit. 3 months in, Daniel finally suggested that they spend a day together, all 3 of them. Are you sure? Eliza asked, both excited and nervous. That's a big step. I'm sure, Daniel said. Sophie asks about you all the time. I think she fell in love with you the moment you shared that giraffe fact. They decided on the zoo, neutral territory where Sophie could be distracted if things got awkward. But from the moment Sophie spotted Eliza at the entrance, bouncing on her toes with excitement, Eliza knew this day would be special. Eliza! Sophie called, breaking free from Daniel's hand to run toward her. Did you know they have a new baby elephant? It was born last month. Eliza smiled, crouching down to Sophie's level. I didn't know that. That sounds exciting. Should we go see it first? Sophie nodded enthusiastically, then surprised Eliza by slipping her small hand into Eliza's. The simple gesture of trust brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes, which she blinked away quickly. Daniel approached more slowly, watching the interaction with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Morning, he said, leaning in to kiss Eliza's cheek. Sorry about the ambush. She's been up since 5, too excited to sleep. I don't mind, Eliza said truthfully. I've been looking forward to today too. The day unfolded better than any of them could have hoped. Sophie was in her element, racing from exhibit to exhibit, sharing animal facts that she'd learned in school. Eliza matched her enthusiasm, adding her own knowledge from the many children's books she'd edited. At the giraffe enclosure, Sophie insisted on taking a photo of Eliza and Daniel together. Stand closer, she directed, wielding Daniel's phone with the seriousness of a professional photographer. Daniel slipped his arm around Eliza's waist, and she leaned into him naturally. It felt right, standing there with him, with Sophie's delighted giggle as she captured the moment. Later, as Sophie was distracted by the sea lion show, Daniel turned to Eliza. Thank you for today, he said quietly. I haven't seen her this happy in a long time. Eliza smiled, watching Sophie's face light up as a sea lion performed a trick. I'm having a wonderful time too. She's an amazing kid, Daniel. She likes you, he said. A lot. And so do I. The simplicity of his statement, the honesty in his eyes, it undid something in Eliza, some knot of doubt that had been tightening for years. I like you both too, she replied. More than I expected to. But their path wasn't without obstacles. 6 months into their relationship, as Eliza was becoming a regular presence in their lives, Sophie went through a phase of testing boundaries. It started with small acts of defiance, refusing to greet Eliza when she came over, deliberately spilling juice on a manuscript Eliza had brought to review while Sophie and Daniel watched a movie. I'm sorry, Daniel said after putting Sophie to bed following a particularly difficult evening where she'd had a full meltdown when Eliza suggested reading her a bedtime story. I don't know what's gotten into her lately. Eliza sat at his kitchen table, cradling a cup of tea. I think I do, she said softly. She's scared. Daniel frowned. Of what? Of losing you. Of things changing again. Eliza met his eyes. Of me taking her mother's place. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. You might be right, he finally said. How do we fix it? We talk to her, Eliza suggested. Not just you, both of us. We reassure her that no one is trying to replace her mom. That her mom will always be her mom, and that's never going to change. The conversation with Sophie the next day was difficult but necessary. They sat in Sophie's room, surrounded by her stuffed animals and the photos of Lisa that Daniel had made sure to keep prominently displayed. I miss Mommy, Sophie admitted, tears streaming down her face. And I'm scared I'll forget her. Oh, sweetheart, Daniel said, gathering her into his arms. You won't forget her. I promise. We'll always talk about her, always remember her. Eliza, sitting at the edge of the bed, added gently, Sophie, I want you to know something important. I'm not trying to be your mom. You already have a mom who loved you very much, and no one can ever replace her. Sophie looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. Then what are you trying to be? Eliza considered her answer carefully. I'm trying to be your friend. Someone who cares about you and your dad. Someone who wants to be a part of your life, if you'll let me. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Can I still talk about my mom with you? Can I tell you stories about her? I would love that, Eliza said sincerely. I'd love to hear all about her. Something shifted in Sophie's expression then, a releasing of tension, a cautious acceptance. Okay, she said simply. It wasn't an immediate fix. There were still difficult days, moments when Sophie pulled away or acted out. But slowly, a new understanding began to form between them. A year into their relationship, Daniel asked Eliza to move in with them. It was a big step, one they discussed extensively, including several conversations with Sophie to make sure she was comfortable with the idea. The day Eliza moved the last of her boxes into their home, Sophie presented her with a drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands, with "Our Family" written across the top in wobbly letters. Eliza knelt down, taking the drawing with trembling hands. This is beautiful, Sophie. Thank you. Sophie fidgeted, suddenly shy. Daddy said you're not replacing my mom. You're just adding more love to our family. Is that right? Eliza looked up at Daniel, who was watching them with suspiciously bright eyes. That's exactly right, she said, opening her arms. Sophie stepped into them without hesitation, and Eliza held her close, feeling the trust this child had placed in her. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel and Eliza sat on the porch swing, looking up at the stars. A year ago, I never would have believed this was possible, Eliza admitted. I'd convinced myself that love wasn't in the cards for me. Daniel took her hand, interlacing their fingers. I felt the same way after Lisa died. Like that part of my life was over. What changed? Eliza asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. I think I had to learn that love isn't a limited resource. That loving again doesn't diminish what I had with Lisa. It honors it, in a way. Shows that she taught me how to open my heart. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, that day in the café when I said no one wanted to date me. I never imagined that the universe was about to prove me so wonderfully wrong. Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I'm glad I was eavesdropping that day. Me too, Eliza whispered. Me too. 2 years after that rainy day in Café Lumière, Daniel proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the 3 of them on a picnic in the park where they'd had their first family outing. Sophie was in on the plan, proudly presenting Eliza with a small box containing a ring that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. Will you marry us? Daniel asked, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. Eliza looked from Daniel to Sophie, who was watching with hopeful eyes, and felt her heart expand with love for this family that had become hers. Yes, she said through happy tears. Yes to both of you. Their wedding was small and meaningful. Sophie served as both flower girl and best daughter, as she insisted on being called. In a moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes, Daniel and Eliza included a special candle-lighting ceremony to honor Lisa's memory and acknowledge her continued presence in their lives. During the reception, Maya, now Eliza's maid of honor, raised her glass for a toast. To Eliza, who once told me that no one wanted to date her, she said with a smile. And to Daniel, who proved her wonderfully wrong.